Hello and welcome to the Crafty Pint podcast. I'm Will,
I'm James.
and welcome to another weekly update on what mountain culture is either buying or selling.
Oh, you suggest we should rename this from the Crafty Pint podcast to the Mountain Culture Weekly. There's plenty going on there. As we discussed when we first talked about the news of them buying Fox Friday, we figured they might be doing certain things with the brand and splitting things up, and that seems to be happening. Obviously, we'd spoken to the Carwins about them taking back Carwin sellers, but now they've, I guess, confirmed more of their plans. Not specifically around WA. All they've said is that a sort of amazing WA indie brewery will be taking over the site in Burswood. So we're still waiting to find out what the identity of that brewery is. We think we've narrowed it down quite tightly. There's been a lot of texts and phone calls and emails going out the last couple of days.
The story might even be out by the time this comes out, but our understanding is there's a few sort of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed before they can actually confirm it. So we've just got to sort of hold tight on that.
Yeah. But aside from that, I mean, the Fox Friday Richmond venue and brewery will become a mountain culture venue. They're going to do the same with the tap room in Tassie. They're going to keep running the Moona hotels and cellars as it is. So I guess technically the only bits they're shedding, so to speak, would be the Fox Friday brand, Carwin cellars, and the Perth venue.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that shocking, I think. Mountain Culture is a very big name in craft beer. People love the brand and radiate towards it. Fox Friday was sort of not as well known nationally, I think, anyway, and did have this remarkable rise, but people really know and love Mountain Culture and what DJ and Harriet are about as well, and the whole team.
And I feel less bad that I did say in the intro when we first discussed this. I'm pretty sure if I was a betting man, Fox Friday would be no more. So
you should have placed that bet, but the odds were probably pretty short.
Yeah. Very true, very true. Aside from that, in sort of non-mountain culture related news, you had a chat to one of the guys at Merino Brewery this week, small brewery in the southwest of Sydney, who've been kicking goals on the awards front, and it's been a very well received article on our social since it went live. So clearly, they're making waves within their world.
Yeah, Tim Howard is the head brewer and has been since the start of the brewery in 2022. It's always good when you run a story like that, one, to see people sort of applauding the person, but it was nice that a lot of people who studied with him at New South Wales TAFE were really quick to say, love studying with him. And even Richard Adamson, one of his former teachers, was said how proud he was. So it's nice to see that when a student like that has sort of gone and done remarkable things in the beer world.
Yeah, and showing how well we plan our editorial content. It's one of two sort of brewer features we've run this week. The other one we've had, one of our writers, Benny, has been down in Tassie for a while. I think he's heading back there later in the year, and he called into Bishno Brewing, caught up with Chris, the head brewer there. Look out for, I guess, a bit more coverage from Tasmania over the coming weeks and months as well. Links to both of those articles in the show notes, obviously. And again, I guess, you talk about sort of London buses, you wait for one for age, then three come along at once. We've got three new crafty sort of related events coming up as well. One of them you've put together, Will?
Yeah, so on July 5th, it's an event with Kaiju called the Lager Love Fest. I've wanted to do this event for about a year, just like, as listeners will know, we ran a story about Nat's fascination with this lager yeast and how it's won them multiple ABAS trophies, and I'll be hanging out with him and Cal, and we'll be chatting all things lager and diving into it. It's really nice to be able to write a story and then hopefully bring some people together to drink the beer and sort of do that whole holistic approach to editorial. It's a nice feeling. So
for sure.
July 5.
Yeah, and we'll include links to that, details of that event. There's also a discount for our Crafty Cabal Beer Club members, as there is for our event we're doing next week in Canberra. Will and I hitting the road. You'll be in Bright even before I hit the road early on Monday morning next week. We're whizzing around the country to record a few more upcoming episodes. And while we're in Canberra, we'll be doing an event with the team at Bent Spoke. Sort of a bit of a blind tasting, also a bit of a Q&A. Richard Watkins, the sort of co-founder and head brewer there, his intention seems to be to interview us for his guests as opposed to the other way around. So we'll see how that goes. So the tickets for that are available via Bent Spoke and for our Cabal members as well. And one that we haven't actually got on the website yet, but it will be there very, very soon, that Mick, our writer up in Queensland, has organised, doing a bit of a masterclass with the team at Slipstream Brewing, who've picked up a few awards this year. He's always been a big fan of their beers, especially their IPAs. So we're doing a masterclass with them also next month, and also with a discount for our Beer Club members. So have a look in the show notes or our calendar / events on the Crafty Pint website for details of all of those.
And sticking with some internal news, this is actually our 50th episode.
Yes.
And as a little treat for ourselves, we've put together a survey because we're very keen to hear what people think of the podcast. So...
Yeah, well, it feels like only yesterday we sat down in here to do the first one of these, and it's been less than a year. But yeah, 50 main episodes plus a few sort of spin-offs as well. But yeah, we just figured it'd be good to get some feedback, what people are enjoying, what they might not be enjoying, what they'd love to hear more of, if anyone has any guests they want to hear. Yeah, so there'll be a link to that in the show notes, and we'll have that open for a couple of weeks and do our best to respond to the feedback we get.
And importantly on that, if you ever want any guests on, I feel like we said this a lot at the start of the show, but maybe haven't as much, just email us, podcast@craftypint.com or will@craftypint.com. Just let us know who you think we should have on the show, because, yeah, we're always eager to hear who people think should be put forward.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, on to this week's show. And I feel there's kind of appropriate guests for a milestone like a 50th episode. Admittedly, there's probably a fair few people out there in the beer world who got into craft beer over the last maybe 5 or 10 years who may have no idea what Seven Sheds is or was, because it closed recently, and may not have heard of Willie Simpson. But like, in terms of people who've been part of the fabrics and helped guide beer in Australia over many decades, Willie Simpson was first involved as a home brewer, running a homebrew store in Sydney, from which a number of craft brewers have come several decades ago. He was a freelance writer writing about beer and other drinks for a number of years. He had a regular column in the Sydney Morning Herald. And yeah, he's been a beer judge, just done pretty much everything in beer over a number of years. Moved down to Tasmania about 2 decades ago, where he met his partner, Catherine Stark. They opened Seven Sheds Brewery. It was only the 4th brewery in Tasmania at the time, which seems kind of nuts when there's like 30 or 40 of them now. Very unique setup. As we discussed, it's like it's an internal block in a residential area in a small town known for its topiary of hedges, and just make I guess was like that archetypal early modern craft beer setup, just making the beers he wanted to make. He's been growing his own hops. There was a small hop farm there the whole time as well. Just a cellar door operation. And I guess as a writer, he often tells stories through his beers. They've been, both him and Catherine have played really crucial roles in building the tourism trail in that part of Tasmania as well. They finally closed the cellar door for the last time just a couple of weeks ago. Having said that, Willie says he was just kind of operating as a gentleman brewer for a while anyway, doing a grand total of 16 1,000 litre batches a year for the last few years. But yeah, he offers some great insight, sort of, on, I guess, that broad perspective, a broad period of craft beer, but also the challenges faced by really small breweries,
and just small business owners as well. I think he really touches on a number of things when he talks about how they could have gone on and kept running Seven Sheds forever potentially, but the sort of restrictions around them and the changes made that impossible, and which is a shame, particularly as we touched on a bit, for a place like Tasmania that likes to pride itself on small producers and things like that as well.
Yeah, well, the sort of the quirks of the container deposit scheme in Tassie that hurt them. Catherine talks about the toilet tax that sort of hit them really unfairly. But there's some great stories about some of the beers they've made. I particularly enjoyed the one about his 100% smoked malt, smoking bagpipes, peated malt. They're getting the peat from a guy called Pete. So just he's someone who, like I say, has been very much part of the fabric of the beer industry, and those that do know him will be aware. I guess aside from the newspaper columns, he wrote a number of books as well on beer, and just really helped educate people way before the craft beer revolution, whatever you want to call it, came along. So that comes up after the break.
And in the middle of the show, you'll hear another Have You Done a Rallying section where we champion the good beer citizens of the beer world. And if you'd also like to champion some wonderful breweries that you love, make sure you get your nominations in for Bluestone's Brewer of the Month,
which is craftypint.com/Bluestone. Anyway, we should get to the main chat with Willie and Catherine at home in Railton. Before we do,
make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast if you're enjoying it, and get in on that survey. Cheers.
Cheers.
When it comes to choosing the right insurance for your brewery, The best decision you'll make is to talk to the team at Midland Insurance. Midland are the experts in insuring Australian breweries and have developed an insurance program tailored specifically to the brewing industry. Midland covers stock losses resulting from spoilage, leakage, or contamination. They provide cover for food service, bar service, tastings, and brewery tours. Midland has a dedicated claims department to manage any claims, and they also offer highly competitive rates for all brewery customers. So if you're looking for a new insurance policy tailored to meet your needs, talk to Midland Insurance today. Visit midlandinsurance.com.au or give Damien a call on 1300 306 571.
Willie, Catherine, thank you for joining us on the show.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Happy to be
Yes.
here.
Excellent. Now, I guess maybe we start at the end, or whatever you want to call it. The decision to finally sort of close the doors for the last time at Seven Sheds after 17 years recently. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, I guess, what led to that decision, and I guess how you feel about the 17 years and bringing it to a close?
Yeah, long question and probably a long answer, but and you've already, it is the long goodbye because Crafty Pint's already written about us 5 years ago when we were on the market,
Selling up.
and obviously that didn't happen. So yeah, I mean, we've basically been flying around in slower, ever decreasing circles. And look, I think we would have been quite happy to keep going at a very modest output, but outside forces sort of forced our hand. And look, it had to happen sooner or later. I feel quite good about it. I feel quite liberated, actually. That we've shut the cellar door. A little bit sad about other things, but yeah, look, it's been a long time coming. But yes, we finally announced that we've shut. No more production. We still have a bit of stock, but that's sort of flying out the door now that everyone knows we're shut.
Yeah, it's always the way. And when you say you were sort of flying in or moving in ever decreasing circles, like what was the operation? Towards the end, had you wound it right
Yeah.
down?
Okay. Well, so the last year, I think we produced 16 batches of beer, which would have been about 1,000 litres
Per batch.
per batch. So I describe myself as a gentleman brewer. Every month or so, I'd go out to the brewery, and with our assistant brewer Paul, production brewer, has been with us for 12 years. We'd knock out a batch of beer, and then we'd sell it. But we had tried. We'd had taken on a distributor for the last 12 months just to see where we could get into venues in Launceston and Hobart, and that was quite an illuminating exercise because I went round in trade half a dozen times, and my God, the market has changed. It's price sensitive. It's very conservative. It's tight. It was like a game of whack-a-mole to me. If we managed to get a keg of beer on tap somewhere in one of these handful of outlets, we were basically knocking off another Tassie craft brewer. And once our keg was empty, we'd be knocked off and someone else had come along. So it told me how competitive and price sensitive and crowded the market was.
Yeah. And so I mean, that's impacting even Tasmania then. I guess you do have a huge number of breweries per capita, even though I get the impression a lot of them are on a smaller scale, sort of a lot of over their own counter sort of retail, but I guess they're still chasing what few taps might be spare.
Yeah. And we tried to do that, and obviously in the early days we did a lot of festivals, a lot of big festivals, and that was very successful. But once the competition arrived, that there was more of us slicing the cake into ever smaller slices.
Yeah,
that's life. That's the market. That's what happened in our lifetime, our career, and here we are.
In terms of outside forces, was there anything else? Like, there's that competitive size of it and the number of breweries, but sort of other factors that you went, no, we just can't do this anymore?
Yeah. Do you want to get in here?
Sure, definitely. So changing markets and particularly post-COVID. We saw a really big change in the visitor profile that was coming to us. So the whole, what I call the mortgage belt, probably the 35 to 50-year-olds, they've got a mortgage, and even the younger people than that are just getting into the mortgage early on. And they've been really squeezed in the last few years. They've bought real estate at high prices. They've committed to mortgages at high interest
Well,
rates.
interest rates went up.
And interest rates went up. And we just lost this whole demographic. They just disappeared. And we've had an increase, I think, in the over 60s who are retiring, the 65 to 70-year-olds particularly, and they're really cashed up, but they don't drink as much. And that's just how they are in their life cycle. And the young ones that are coming up behind them are not drinking at all. That seems to be what's happening in our observation. We're not getting that market at all. So yes, there's been a big shift in the market, and there's been a shift in how they spend their money.
Yeah, and you mentioned as well the other day a number of sort of other costs that were coming in that were sort of punitive for an operation of your size as well. That
it was really a matter of the container refund scheme. Even though this is the catch-22. Even though we're exempt from the scheme because we've been under 20,000 units a year for a long time, we still had to comply with labels and barcodes and do all the reporting and paperwork. So the cost of producing enough labels to get us through, say, the next 2 years would have been something like 10 grand.
More than that.
More than that. The state government offered us $1,000 to cover our extra costs.
Sorry, I'm the bean counter. Labels and barcodes would have cost us around about 35 grand if we kept the full range that we were producing.
Yeah.
Wow.
18 months ago, shall we say?
Yeah.
And so that level of compliance on top of some other compliance issues that came up, which were so what I call the toilet tax. We suddenly had to start paying for extra toilets because we were running a bar for 9 hours a week.
Right. Yeah. Even though you've done it for 17 years and everyone had been fine.
And it was all approved. Everything was fine for 17 years. We'd actually had Taswater come in 2018 or 2019, and everything was fine at that stage. And then they've come back and done an audit in the last 12 months and said, no. Well, and the toilets was probably a bit longer than that. It was probably 2 years ago or so. So that effectively doubled what we were paying for our water and sewage, particularly sewage, and then the rate trade waste went up as well, which wasn't as much as the toilet tax, to be perfectly honest. But they wanted us to spend 20 grand to be compliant. They didn't say you have to spend this money, but they had said you have to do this stuff. And so when you look at how much it's going to cost to do that stuff, that's 20 grand. And we're sort of at this stage of our lives, it's like, we spend 50 grand on trade waste and labels, or we can spend that on
shut the door,
other things. So
I mean, the bottom line is 17 years ago when we started, we were really just dealing with our local council and the tax office for excise. And suddenly we're paying trade waste tariff, which was doubled. And then they're saying, you've got to do this, this and this. And we said, well, hang on, we're just a little artisan producer. We're 16 food days in the last 365. I reckon on average, family household with a couple of teenagers, we're putting more down in the way of trade waste in a year than we are. But they don't see that. They see us as food manufacturers, category 2 brewers. So it's a gouge for small business. And,
were you surprised by that at all? I mean, obviously Tasmania, part of the Tasmania story is small artisan producers. It's kind of nature and beautiful world, and then artisan producers is why people go to Tasmania. Like, do you see a different way through that, or how it's sort of come?
Well, no, that's a lovely thought. But, in reality doesn't happen. I mean, the other thing we've had to deal with, by the way, we've just reclaimed weekends because the last 17 years we've been running a cellar door, and either Catherine or myself or both of us have been there, and a lot of that's about penalty rates. Like if we pay someone to be there on a Sunday, it's prohibitive. If we have a production day on a public holiday, it's prohibitive. But when you go into a shop on Friday afternoon or the bank, everyone says, "Have a great weekend," and I go, "Well, yeah, right. We're going to be working. What are you doing? We're in hospitality." And in fact, we've had a stall at a farmers market in Launceston for the last 12 years. So I get up at 5:15, drive off and run that, and come back and around a cellar door. It's our busiest day of the year. That's not a week. That's not a weekend. So things have changed. I mean, 17 years ago, the landscape was a lot simpler. We're basically operating in a residential area. I don't think we would be allowed now to start a craft brewery in a shed in our backyard, surrounded by 12 residential neighbours. So, look, we were lucky, we did it, but we live in a different world now, and it's highly compliant. It's a nanny state, and it's making it very hard for small business, let alone craft brewers. So, look, I'm happy to put my feet up and not have to worry about that.
Is it something that you're seeing or hearing from some other of your Tasmanian peers as well, that they're at the smaller end of the scale?
Yeah, look, a couple of our friends who've got very small artisan soft drink companies are getting hammered by this container refund scheme, and for them, it's I can imagine it's just a huge extra cost, and it's not the cost. It's you have to do this reporting of movements, and even though you're exempt, you still have to spend money on labels and do all the reporting. And for a small business, yes, that's time is money.
Yep.
So I don't know how they're going, but I feel for them, and it may tip them over the edge. I don't know.
Yeah. And so, heading back, maybe even going further back than 17 years. So, many people, but probably most people that be listening to this or reading the Crafty Pipe will know of your sort of life before brewing, Willie. But what were the two of you doing leading up to just moving to Tassie, starting Seven Sheds?
Yeah, well, you're talking about another lifetime, James. Really. So I was a freelance writer, specialising in writing about beer, but also spirits, most other alcoholic beverages other than wine. I wrote 4 books about beer. And then I started a craft brewery. We started a craft brewery, but I kept writing, and even writing a weekly column for the Sydney Morning Herald for the first 4 years of Seven Sheds. And Catherine was working full time. You were...
Yeah. So I was developing a career in tourism and regional development. So at my last job before I decided to support the brewery when it was going off, and we were at the end of every day having tears, to be perfectly honest, because there was so much going on in the brewery and Billy needed support, and I had a fairly responsible job as well. But so I was the economic development manager in our local government council, and I resigned from that position 3 years into it, but I say 4 years because there was a year of developing and setting the business up before we actually opened. So we opened in 2008. I resigned from my full-time job in January 2011, soon after we'd been flooded, and the flood certainly tipped me over the edge. That was just another factor in not working full-time while trying to support what was going on at home.
Yeah.
And just so people, I guess, understand, when you say about sort of the residential area, it kind of surprised me even 15 years ago, whenever it was I first visited, you do sort of walk past these houses and go down the long driveway, and then there's the Seven Sheds and the cellar door.
Yeah.
And you live on the property as well. I mean, if people haven't been, you come down cellar door on the left-hand side, hops growing straight ahead, a smattering of sheds, and then the residence off to the right, isn't it? So very, very much a home brewery. To an extent.
And it's an internal block.
Yeah.
So we actually have 11 adjacent neighbours, and that was, I mean, part of the thing. We'd never we wouldn't have been allowed to, but we weren't interested in running a bar or anything after 6 o'clock. So we really had this model that was based on like a regional winery cellar door, where people would come in, taste our beers, sit down in a very peaceful, quiet environment, look at the hops growing when they were growing, and
Listen to the
hopefully
birds.
listen to the bird life, and hopefully buy some beer to take away. And that model worked pretty well for a while. Yep.
For a long time.
Yep.
Yep.
And then I know you sort of did a lot of work in the tourism area. With I guess the first extended period we had spending time together, Willie, was when we drove around for a couple of days, not long after
Yeah.
you launched the Northwest. Is it Tasting Trail or Coast to Cradle to Coast Trail? With you
Yes.
guys involved, a number of other small artisan producers. Is that something that was you always envisaged as being part of Seven Sheds? And I guess looking ahead, is back up to now, is that something that is being impacted negatively with the sort of the changes as well, or is tourism kind of still sort of proceeding as it always has been?
Oh, look, from my point of view, I had no idea what it was like to be a tourist operator or tourism operator. But yes, we very quickly became part of a region. In the early days, we were the only craft brewery in the Northwest. So when we went to tourism forums, we sponsored it with beer. We sponsored the cocktail dinner and the dinner and stuff, and that was great for networking and stuff initially. But it also made you understand that you were part of a greater region, and anything could bring. We got a regional tourism grant to build our cellar door, and that was based on the fact that we could generate equivalent of two full-time jobs in a small regional town in Tasmania, and we did that. And what it made me appreciate, we were bringing people into this town of Railton who might 1 in 10 or 20 might fill up with petrol at the petrol station. They might get a takeaway. They might spend money in the post office, and that's what we're part of. We're part of a region, and if you look at it, someone might say we were clinically insane to open a craft brewery in a small regional town in Tasmania, but we made it work. And Catherine will tell you, we don't have debts. We didn't borrow money. We're not hanging up the pool cue because we're insolvent.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say something more about that?
Oh, look, I mean, part of the story in the background, I suppose, is that I was already a Bachelor of Business in Tourism, studying regional development policy, blah, blah, blah. But I did the number crunching when Billy came home one day and said, let's put a brewery in that shed. We already had the big shed. And I think he had a bit of an idea that he'd been not passionate about, but had been thinking about since he was a young man, and he saw the opportunity. But he came home one day and said, what do you think about putting a brewery in that back shed? And I did some number crunching. Like, I'm a Bachelor of Business. That was my first degree, so I know how to do the figures. And I put together some projections and took them to the accountant, and the accountant said go for it. So it wasn't just a blind, silly idea that we just started doing. We actually did do some research in the background, and I was working in tourism, and I knew a bit about the visitor flows in the region and so on. So it wasn't hard to predict what might happen in those early days. And soon after we set up, we had very early conversations with people that were interested in developing a tasting trail, and that started to gain some momentum. 2011 was when it really started to actually happen, but we'd been talking for some time before then, and we were involved with that right from the very early inception of the idea and right through till I think I resigned from the chair position and from the committee around about a year or 18 months ago, something like that. But on that committee right from the start was either myself or Willie. That was up until just a short time ago. So maybe 12 years or so of Seven Sheds being involved in that process. And also other events and things that we were involved in that
Well, Taste of the Northwest.
Yeah.
So we were involved in organising a one-day event for this region for food and drink, And again, well, I was on the committee and president for many years, until my doctor talked about my blood pressure, and I had
Get back on the kayak, Willie.
But look, and a lot of that was very fulfilling because it was doing stuff that it was voluntary. It was a lot of hours, a lot of hard work, but ultimately you were putting on an event, making locals were turning up and having a great time. It was a free entry event. So that's one of the things, one of the more fulfilling things we did outside Seven Sheds, which I hadn't ever envisaged you would get to be part of that. So it's not just operating your brewery, you become part of the community, the region, and like-minded producers.
Yeah.
And same thing with the farmers market in Launceston. We've had a stall there for 12 years, and I feel more affinity, I think, with a lot of the stallholders there than necessarily craft brewers, because they're all similar people to us, couples mainly who have got a passion or a manic obsession with something. Most have got personality disorders, which means you're obsessed with producing some very niche product and not making much money out of it. But they're great people, and they're equally passionate people.
In terms of looking back at the moment, does anything else sort of stand out that was particularly fulfilling or you feel satisfied with as you close this chapter?
Oh, look, I think we've made a lot of people happy over 17 years. A few people have gone overboard and made other people unhappy by their enthusiasm.
It's a very polite way of putting it.
Yeah, but it's we've made a lot of friends with fellow producers, not necessarily brewers, or winemakers, other producers. We've made a lot of friends with loyal local customers, and that's been a fantastic thing. But we've sacrificed a lot. I think we've sacrificed social life and weekends. But you weigh all that up and you think, would I do it again? Yeah, I would do it absolutely.
And just to clarify, I mean, like you were involved, you were a home brewer, you were involved in the home brewing sort of scene in Sydney several decades ago. So I guess you were always making beer while you were writing about beer. And so was that, was it always part of a long-term goal, or did you get to the point where you could see something was growing, you were reporting on something that was happening and it was like, I want to be part of this? Or was it just, I have this, like, I can brew and I need to satisfy this side of me?
Yeah, look, there was all of that element, James, and yes, I came from a home brewing club in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and a shop that I managed, and there's 6 or 7 or 8 people who were home brewers there who've gone out to work as craft brewers. So that was quite a crucible of early, the green shoots of the craft brewing thing, and the writing about it. And I guess, there were a few people sooling me on from the sidelines, and you can mention them, like Brad Rogers, but particularly Richard Watkins from Wigan Pen. And I went, visited him, did a couple of brews there, and I saw how basic their setup was to make, and he was making bloody good beer. And I thought, well, you don't need, the Chinese-built manufactured equipment. You can do it. And so we ended up putting a brewery together with reused dairy equipment. We can talk about that later on. But he was a great mentor to us, and we flew him down a couple of times to help us set up and brew.
The first couple of brews.
And he was always at the end of the phone. It might have been twice a day, and then it was twice a week, and then it was twice a month, and then it was once a year. But he was great as a supporter. And I think you need that, because really we were flying by the seat of our pants. And it was great to have those relationships, and all those people have gone on and had bigger and better careers in the craft brewing industry. And I keep going back to musical analogies, and I think we were like, I think Seven Sheds, with our open fermenters and non-automated equipment, we're a bit like the vinyl end of the music industry. And there are people that would argue that sound quality didn't actually improve beyond vinyl. It just became more convenient and digitized. And I also think Seven Sheds was a bit like the Velvet Underground. And it's been said about the Velvet Underground that it didn't sell many records, but every second person who bought a record went off and started their own band. And I think we were a bit influential to our own detriment, by the way. People saw what we were doing out of pretty basic equipment and thought, oh, we can have a go. And just like the Velvet Underground, some of our people who worked for us, principally Evan Hunter, have gone on and had successful careers. He's a bit like Lou Reed. He was in the Velvet Underground. Now he's gone and done his own stuff.
Love that analogy, Evan.
And there's other people like that. So if anyone remembers the Velvet Underground, it's what we were like.
Well, I think what's fascinating, you mentioned Evan, is that he's now at Bendigo Brewing, and they've got I guess a more modern brewery, but he is still fastidious about using traditional techniques, ingredients, brewing the hard way. I guess maybe trying to recreate the vinyl scratch.
And what I've got I have tasted some of his beers, but I've seen what he's doing. I think he is following his own heart. He's not just doing what everyone else is doing with the cookie cutter list of beers. So I think that's what we did, and it's nice to think that other people have picked that up and run with it.
Yeah. I'd love to come back and talk a bit more about the beers, the meads, the hops, that kind of stuff. Maybe take a short break now, and then we'll come back and focus a bit more on, I guess, the personality of Seven Sheds and the products.
And look at us, we're back here to celebrate the good beer citizens of the beer world with Have You Done a Rallings campaign, celebrating all the great people in beer that make the community what it is. Mm-hmm. James, you've got a wonderful honourable mention.
Yes, the honoration this month is for Daryl Cook from Sunshine Brewing. Daryl is a massive advocate for the independent breweries of the Sunshine Coast. He's at every event, IBA meetup and local conference, and works hard to communicate messaging about brewery ownership and independence in their tap room. Pretty sure when I called in, they would have had the printout of who owns your beer hanging on the wall a few years ago. Daryl's also recently started planning a local independent beer day with tour buses travelling between various breweries on the Sunshine Coast. The nomination ends with a legend of the biz. So, who wouldn't want to be called a legend of the biz? However, this month's winner, I should say, someone you spoke to a few weeks ago, I guess, who's enjoyed some pretty amazing success of their own and now wanting to pass that on to someone else.
Yeah, well, the brewer behind Australia's champion beer, Pete McDonald from Wedgedale Brewing. We were talking, he was like, oh, that's right, I need to nominate none other than Steve Hendo Henderson from Rockstar Brewer Academy. A lot of people know Hendo from his long time in the beer industry, but the work he does is really important, I think, and so does Macca. He says that they've been working with Hendo for around 4 years, and his knowledge and experience of the brewing industry is amazing. He's always ready to help out and any questions around brewing, get in contact with Hendo and see what he has to offer.
Yeah, there you go. Well, a real character as well. Someone who's been around the industry in many roles for a number of years, and I'm sure there'll be many other breweries around the country who go, yeah, I agree with everything Pete says. So congratulations to those guys. You both nominee and the winner will receive a voucher from Rallings Labels and Stickers. So if you'd like to nominate a good beer citizen from your part of the world, all you have to do is jump online at craftypint.com/Rallings, and we'll be back with another winner next month.
And now back to the show. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome back. Willie, Catherine, let's talk about some of the beers and also maybe starting with mead, because I know that's always been a big passion project as well, and it's not an alcoholic drink we see much of in Australia.
Well, no, it's not. And oh God, here we go. So, my life's been the road less travelled. So for a while, I thought I was going to open a meadery in where we are now. But I thought, well, that's a bit too niche. However, we had been making mead on a semi-commercial basis. If 100 litres is semi-commercial. So when we actually got the grant for the federal tourism grant, that wasn't supposed to be for start-up breweries, but because Kath managed to massage the application to suggest we'd been making mead for a couple of years, which we had. We were an existing business. So the mead, I've always made mead, but it's always been a very small part of what we do. But I'm still making it, and it still fascinates me. And I'll probably ride off into the sunset, still making mead and still making beer, probably on a home brew basis.
What was it that fascinated you in particular about mead then? I mean, there are a handful of mead makers around the country. I think they're all fairly interesting characters. I'm sort of intrigued to know.
Yeah, look,
what it
I
is
just think
particularly-
because it was the drink that history forgot. If you read the history, it was older than mead it's older than wine or beer. It's not the oldest alcoholic drink, by the way. I was telling people that, but the Tasmanian Aborigines were consuming fermented cider gum
Mhm.
50,000 years ago. So get that.
Well, maybe that can
Anyway,
be your
it
next
fascinated me.
project.
When I moved to Tasmania, this is the epicenter of honey. It's the
Mhm.
epicenter of all sorts of honeys from Leatherwood to other ones. So yeah, that sort of got me. But then we started a craft brewery, and beer just took off. So that was on the back burner,
Mhm.
as it were.
And what would you say was your approach to, but when you started the brewery, your approach to beers? I mean, obviously there was, I guess, more traditional English style ales in there.
Well, yeah, and you say that, and I know you've accused us of being Anglophiles, and was it wantonly uncool, James? You
I
described
may have used
I've
such a
heard
phrase.
that many
I would have
times.
I would have used it as a compliment, I'm sure.
I
Yeah.
took it as a backhanded compliment,
Yeah.
then I took it as a full compliment.
That's how it was
Yes,
intended.
yeah. So very much brewing beers we wanted to make and drink, and that was in the early stage when we had this business plan and we both had full-time jobs. It was like, okay, we'll make a beer, which was Kentish Ale, and Kentish is the area, is the local government body we live in. One of the hops was from Kent, but anyway. And look, if it didn't sell, we didn't have a business, we were going to drink it all ourselves, and that wouldn't matter. So that was our business plan. But very quickly, we had to keep making it to keep up with production. Then we made other beers. And there was a funny thing when I went round and told a few of the local craft brewers here that we were shutting down, sort of, told them informally. And they said, a couple of them said, have you got any smoking bagpipes left? Which is our most extreme beer we make, a peat smoked Scotch ale, which again was Evan Hunter's contribution, but now one of my
Working title Evans Folly back in the day.
It was one of my favourite beers. And I thought, well, okay, no, we haven't got any left. And where have you guys been for the last couple of years? Because if you'd been supporting us, we would still be making it. But that is one of the beers that came from left field. I peat smoked the grain over 4 days with Tasmanian peat. It's a very extreme version of a Scotch ale. And I love the fact, and I tell people that the regular consumers of smoking bagpipes, the Seven Sheds, were by far the most interesting consumers we ever had. They tended to have very extreme hobbies and recreational activities. So there you go. That was smoking bagpipes.
It wasn't just a peat smoked
Yeah.
malt based beer. It was 100% peat smoke, wasn't it? There was no other base
Mostly,
malt in
yeah,
there.
yeah. And Tasmanian peat. So, we'd get the peat from a bloke called Pete, by the way. And I love that connection. And it was hard work, and, to make 800 litres of beer, it would take me 4 days to peat smoke the stuff. No one would do that.
And he always made it in the depths of winter when it was still and foggy, and the smoke would just kind of permeate the fog that was hanging around the town, and
Yeah.
you'd kind of smell it.
And I'd actually make a point of, there's a bit of personal information here, but I'd wear the same clothes for 4 days because I'd be so reeking of peat smoke at the end. There was no point in washing in between.
There's people on
and
the
there
other
was
side of
another-
Railton going, Willie's making his bagpipes again, kids.
I'd hope
Those that knew,
I hope
knew.
knows. But look, and this is how the market has changed for me. So in the very early days, we made a Belgian double Trappist style beer called Elephant's Trunk. 7%, based on roughly on Chimay. And
Chimay Blue.
Chimay Blue. And we were putting it in 50-litre kegs for a single outlet in Hobart, and people were drinking it. And this was 12, 13 years ago. And in the last year, when we've taken on a distributor, and I've gone around the trade down there and seen how conservative and price sensitive it is, and I said, well, what about a Belgian double? And they're going, nah, wouldn't work. So that was amazing to me that back then people were happy to drink stuff like that and take it on. I mean, what's happened? Why? Was that a shot in the dark or whatever? But
Well, I don't.
we
I
stopped,
kind
we
of hope
stopped making it.
we kind of hope it's a temporary thing with
I
tied
hope
to
so.
the mortgage belt not coming out. Hopefully it's a temporary thing that
Yep.
there's less money flowing around, and therefore the venues are getting more conservative about what they pour, and maybe brewers are adapting to that. But what's been interesting as well is that I think there has been a movement, because maybe it could be done more cost effectively, back to some more of the beer styles that you have been making and championing as well. Not so crazily OTT hopped, and more about subtleties of malt and balance and that kind of thing. We seem to be, for certain parts of the market, we've certainly covered it a couple of times in the last couple of years, people moving back to that more, I guess, traditional styles of brewing as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that was just the journey we went on. I got quite obsessed about making a Pilsener in the last few years. I said we'd never, someone quoted it back to me, I said we'd never make a lager as long as my backside pointed south. But we did, and it became a bit of a mission for me.
Oh, didn't you go and source the purest water on the planet? You even did it with water from that would land on that point in the northwest of Tasmania.
That's where it started. So it was basically the purest rainwater on the planet. So we made a Pilsner, and then I thought, okay, well let's keep making this. But the other thing that I guess this brings in is the fact that because our fermenters, or our whole brewery, is dairy equipment, our fermenters were open fermenters, so they're quite shallow. They're not pressurized. And, it was a bit nerve-wracking in the early days. That, well, what's going to happen here? We're going to get infection or whatever. But when you think about it, that was the way beer was made for, I don't know, what do we know, 6,000 years before stainless steel really came along in the 1920s.
Before the Unitank.
And the more I thought about it, we just did that out of necessity and because it was cheap. But I think that was our house flavour. And the fact that I was able to go in the day after we'd brewed and lift the dust lid on a fermenter and look at this heaving, seething mass of live yeast krausen happening, and smell it and hear it. It was a very vigorous fermentation. And so more recently, I got interested in looking at the difference between open fermentation and the classic Unitank, which is the industry standard. And when you think about it, we were making 1,000-litre batches of beer. If you look at a 1,000-litre Unitank, the surface area on the tank on our open fermenter is almost double. Mm-hmm. So the yeast, I don't want to get too technical, but the yeast is under less pressure. It ferments very vigorously. It loves that freedom, and it creates all sort of interesting complexities, fruity esters, all sorts of complexities. And we had the opportunity, we outsourced some of our beers to Morrison's Brewery because we were dipping our toe in putting our beer in cans and doing stuff. And it was interesting because what we found was the Pilsener that we brewed at Morrison's was far better. It was much cleaner, much crisper. That seemed to work, temperature control. The Kentish Ale didn't really have the depth of character that our house beer did. And the IPA that we only did one of them at Morrison's, it just didn't work. It didn't have the balance. It didn't have all sorts of things. And I'm putting that down, and I'm not a scientist, not a physicist, not anything, but I'm a craft brewer, but I'm not even that anymore. What I thought was the geometry of the equipment affects the final flavour. And I wish someone would actually do some more research on this, because I really think if you're trying to make the very best IPA or pale ale, I'd be looking at open fermentation, because you're going to get far more complexity in there All their uni tanks, if you look at the history, no, I'm going to go off on a tangent here if you don't stop me. Dr. Leopold Nathan, who basically invented the Yeti tank at the same time that rolled stainless steel came out. It was all about trying to brew a beer in tropical conditions so you could keep the beer cool. But of course, those narrow vessels are very space efficient. So big breweries loved it because they were controlling the temperature when they were mass producing lager, and you get a lot more tanks in a floor space. So
Well, if you
look
are
at open fermentation. Come back. It's the next frontier.
Well, if you're not brewing, 16 times a year anymore, that's 16 days that you've got plus bottling, to further your studies. You could be Dr. Willie by the time we next speak.
Yeah, but who would employ me, James? Who would pay for that esoteric knowledge?
I probably have to be in book form, maybe scroll form or something like that. I don't know.
Maybe.
Well, there's been a lot of beers over the years. Catherine, any particular favourites of yours, or you beers where you've contributed the idea, the concept, or anything like that? I mean, I always kind of think you never left the storytelling behind with Seven Sheds,
Yeah.
and that the Bass Strait IPA, sending the beer back and forth. There was always storytelling involved in so many of the beers, and I just wonder whether there were any that were really close to your heart, Catherine.
So, a couple of things spring to mind, and particularly our first two brews, which actually were Willie's home brews back in the day when I first met him in Hobart in the early 2000s. He would brew what is Kentish Ale essentially now. It hasn't changed very much since then in his 20-litre homebrew kit. And that was his summer beer, and he would brew Willie Warmer as his winter beer. So they were beers he was already brewing, and they are still on the list now. So they've lasted through that whole craft brewing period. They're still around. They're still popular beers. And I guess the other one for me that has a stronger story for me. Oh, there's lots of good stories, but for me, obviously Stark Raven, because my surname is Stark. But I wanted a stout. I wanted an oatmeal stout, and I was pretty keen to have a fairly heavy stout, I suppose. So, so the backstory there is that I'd been lobbying for a stout for some time. Willie wasn't enthused with that idea. We had Willie Warmer already, and he thought that was enough. And Evan was our assistant brewer. I think he was still assistant brewer at that stage, and he was a bit interested, and so they did get to the point where they were starting to taste some stouts when they were having brew days. And one day I was driving home from my job 10 minutes up the road, and I came around a sharp corner, and I was thinking, what could we call our stout, even though there hadn't been permission to make a stout at that stage.
You already advanced the
So
process
that was
in
my
your mind.
kind of conversation in my head. I don't know why that afternoon, but I was driving home from work thinking about that, and I came around a sharp corner, and there were a couple of ravens pecking at a wallaby carcass, and I almost took them out, which is unusual for ravens down here. They eat roadkill all the time, but they're pretty wary of cars. And anyway, it popped into my head, you'd have to be stark raving mad to have your supper in that spot. And I got home, and Willie'd been having a bit of a bad hair day. I told him the story, and he said, well, you'd have to be stark raving mad to build a brewery in your backyard. So the name stuck. And the beer didn't eventuate for a little while after that, but Stark Raving obviously became Stark Raven.
Yeah.
The Ravens being black, Stark being strong, 6.7% oatmeal stout. So.
And that's a good story, because I thought it was only going to be a seasonal beer, but it very quickly got some very enthusiastic regular customers.
Yeah.
And when we ran out over summer, they got very grumpy. So we ended up brewing it all year round. And I mean, in fact, we have 4 regular black beers. I don't know any other brewery that has that. But and I guess the other thing, a lot of people said to us, why do your beers taste so good? Well, not everyone, but a few people. And I think, there's a few reasons. One is the open fermentation. One is we don't filter, we don't take anything out of it. But we brew to style. So to me, a stout has to have strength. So our Stark Raven is 6.7% alcohol. It was originally sort of based on a little bit of a Cooper's Stout, but the oat, I thought it had to have oats. And a few people over the years have said, a lot of your beers are high octane, they're very high strength. I said, well, no, we're actually brewing them to style. That to me is to style. So to me, a stout, it is a stout porter. It should have the alcohol, and it's not. The alcohol is not there to get you drunk. The alcohol is there to balance all the other big flavours that are there. And so Stark Raven, I mean, that's one that probably when we announced we were shutting the brewery, the saddest customers, other than the smoking bagpipes, were the Stark Raven people, because they're pretty rusted on, and equally interesting people, by the way.
Yeah. And the Kentish Ale as well with that group. The Stark Raven and Kentish Ale seems to appeal to the same bunch of people. So Kentish is their light beer, 5.2%.
Yeah.
And what about that? I guess it was brewery, meadery, hop garden. So the future of the hop garden, will that feed into some home brews? And
So what I've done, the hop garden is one of those things that seems like a really good idea, and you put a lot of effort into. And I mean, honestly, we can buy hops cheaper than we can grow them, but we've reduced the hop garden, and I'm going to keep some going. And I'm going to offer to some of the local craft brewers here to do a fresh hop beer, because that'll give me something to do, if nothing else. And it is kind of nice to see that seasonal rotation of the shoots coming up in early spring, and you having to put the strings up and go through the whole 6-month growing season. And it was great for our customers when they were sitting out on the deck observing all that. But it wasn't always easy work. Like growing anything has its challenges. But yeah, I'm going to at least keep one variety going and see who might be interested in making a fresh hop beer out of it.
And which varieties are you still growing at the minute? There was Leggett.
Cascade.
Cascade. Okay. Yeah.
And what about the local scene? I mean, you were the only craft brewery in the northwest of Tasmania when you started.
Yeah.
You would have been one of the very few in the state. Though obviously there's the big one up north and the big one down south.
Yep.
But 2 meter tall Moo would have been
Moo Brew and Ironhouse started up like a year before us or two. So we call ourselves number 4. And for 2 or 3 years that was the case. And then the cavalry arrived, and most of it was in Greater Hobart. And for us, I mean, that was there were about half a dozen of our customers, people who were buying our beer either to put on tap in their breweries or buy bottles for various things, that started their own breweries. So that tells you where the industry was going. Our customers were becoming competitors, and that's just the market forces, the nature of the industry. And then people were getting beers brewed under contract and putting it on tap in their pubs under their own label, and that's still happening. So look, the universe has changed. It really has. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm not going to make any predictions on that.
Oh, damn it! We're going to try and pin you down. I mean, as someone who has been writing, brewing, home brewing, supplying home brewers, etc., farmers markets for a number of decades now, as an observer, what have you made, especially maybe the last 5-10 years, and where things are? I mean, we're in a very convoluted state now for all manner of reasons, but have you watched on? I guess you would have been surprised maybe how it's gone. Have you watched on with fascination? Has it been morbid fascination, just like going, what the hell's going on? Like, what has it been like?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're a bit isolated here in northwest Tasmania, but when I was reading Crafty Pint every week pre-COVID, it was just astounding about all these breweries that were doubling, tripling, quadrupling their production. I thought, well, what is happening here? This is just, as I've told you, an industry that is on a turbocharged bender. And it didn't sound like it was sustainable, and it obviously wasn't. And the real worry for me is that when we started up, locals supported us, and so did a lot of their kids. There were kids who were going to uni who were drinking our beer and drinking it in Hobart and doing all this. But they're now middle-aged, and we haven't seen that next generation come along. So I'm always talking about this lost generation that haven't actually taken up craft beer. And Kath's daughter's that sort of age, late 20s, and I sort of see what her and the cohorts drink, and I have to look the other way.
If they drink at all.
If they drink at all, and they're not socialising like we did. I mean, people aren't going out to nightclubs to meet partners. They're doing it all on social media. I mean, you guys know all this. So the world has changed incredibly quickly. I don't know. I'm not going to make any predictions.
Maybe there's been sort of a reaction against us being, our generation or generations being, a bit more social, socializing a bit more harshly, shall we say? And there's been that reaction. Maybe their kids will look, why are they not going out? Why are they not having fun? And we just need to, bide our time until the next generation rebels against the sensible seltzer drinking.
Well, and that may happen, and when the economy goes up too, that might happen because. I think that's important to think that when we were in peak beer 10 years ago, 2015. That was the year we produced the most beer. We had huge events. We sold untold amount of beer. People were spending because interest rates were low. People were positive. Economy was up. Now everything goes in cycles, so I think that'll happen again. But obviously, Seven Sheds won't be around for that much swing. But I hope other people will keep doing the thing right and keep making beer that they want to make, that has some authentic connection, and eventually that younger market might come back to it. Yeah. But I'm not about to say how it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. I hope it happens.
Have there been changes, or evolutions that you've noticed over the last, whether it's 10, 20, 30 years within beer or hospitality that you have looked and gone, that is good, that's better than how things were, earlier on?
I think women have been included as beer consumers. That wasn't the case when we started. It was very much a blokes universe. So I'm happy that that's happened, but probably not as much as Catherine would hope has happened. Yeah, look, I don't know what else. There's a lot of things going here from a small business perspective. It's not, I don't know whether I'd be wanting to open a small business at this stage of any description, given that what you've got to jump through compared to what we had to jump through.
Yeah.
So people who might want to follow their dreams, which is basically what we did on a wing and a prayer and a oily rag, I don't think that's possible anymore, and that's a bit sad. But that's life, as they say.
And what about if you sort of look at what you have achieved? I guess focusing specifically on maybe the last couple of decades, not just with the brewery, but the tourism side of things. If you were to sort of look and go, well, these are the things that we're really. We're really happy that we did, or that you'd like to think, people outside would go, that's what Seven Sheds, that's what the tourism trail, that's what these guys brought to the area, that's what they stood for.
So from a legacy perspective, if you like, is that what you're sort of thinking?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
The tasting trail, absolutely. And we both have been very much engaged in that process and are very proud of what has been achieved there. So it started off as the Cradle to Coast tasting trail. It's now Tasting Trail Tasmania, but it's very much focused on our region, northwest Tasmania. In the early days, when we actually put together our first grant application, when we first set up the brewery, there was a piece of policy, if you like, around, or not policy, but a document around called From Source to Sensation, which was about everything that you could need for a 5-course meal grows in northwest Tasmania or is produced in northwest Tasmania out of local produce. And it's a beautiful region, and we're very proud to live here and be a part of that. And so the Tasting Trail certainly is a legacy that we're proud to leave behind. Obviously, other people are running that now, but it's something that we helped to create. Taste of the Northwest. I'm not sure where that's going. That is again, that's been an event that was running from 2009, I think, through to current. So we were very much involved with setting that up. We were involved with setting up the procedures so that people could carry on after we, like I was involved with that as well, but not for as long as Willie was. But yeah, so helping to make that event, that local community event, which is broader than just a local community, but very much focused on being free to the public and about the regional produce. So very much focused on our northwest region of Tasmania. So we've done a lot of work that's basically volunteer work. Like, I don't think that we've necessarily gotten back any generated income consistent with what the effort that we've put into those projects. But what has been beautiful about all of those projects is just the networks and the people that we've met and worked with along the way. So I hope that we'll be remembered for those things, as well as for producing amazing beer, which I think that we have done right from the start. And we've changed a lot of locals' perceptions and other people's perceptions, but the locals are the ones that we see and hear from the most about, what their experience of beer is.
Yeah, and I think even maybe almost whether it was going to happen anyway, or maybe on the back of COVID stopping people traveling, or people having less money, stay more local, is that a lot of small breweries, as they have sort of become tight in the bells or whatever, have become more locals and community focused. This is my sort of hope. The good that'll come from this era, as people have had to shrink or what's the not broaden their horizons, whatever the opposite of broaden their horizons, tighten their horizons, is that they're a greater focus on your own local community, your own few suburbs or whatever, will hopefully foster a stronger and deeper engagement with local breweries. You won't just be going, oh, that's the cool IPA, I'm going to go and chase now. It's like, oh, I've got this local brewery, I understand what this industry is about, I know the people there. And that hopefully that this interesting. You talk about community and local a lot, and networks, and I think that is something that beer is still very good at, even if it's struggling in other areas.
Yeah, it's not the person that comes and buys one because they want to try the new beer that has kept us afloat for 17 years.
Yeah,
it's the people that come and buy carton, every 2 or 3 months, whatever. It's the people that come and sit in our cellar door, and they don't have that opportunity anymore. But it's those people that have kept us alive. It's not the chasing the new beer, taste it, rate it, whatever.
What have you been doing with your weekends since finally closing the door after 17
Well,
years, by the way? You just sat there sort of, automatically go out there, turn the key and go, hang on, I don't need to do this.
Yeah, well, I haven't taken up golf, but I am still getting up at 5:15 a.m. to go to the Launceston Harvest Market, as long as we've got stock. Look, I'm finding things to do. Thanks for asking, James.
We actually went to Watamana for the first time.
Well, I won't know what that is.
I know you won't, but look it up.
But it is, we've reclaimed a weekend that we didn't have. But look, it's going back to that point about the local market. I think one of the most fulfilling things was seeing, and before COVID, we always relied on the tourist season. We got a real, that 2 months around Christmas and beyond, we used to get a surge of people coming in, and that was a huge cash flow. But since COVID, we haven't seen it. And it's not just COVID, it's economic turn down and stuff. But one of the most fulfilling things was to see some of our local regulars engaging with, international visitors from Singapore on our deck, saying, oh, why did you come to Seven Sheds? And that was a lovely thing to see our local regular customers engaging with international tourists and basically selling our product for us. So it's been an interesting journey. There's been a lot of highlights and a lot of fulfillments and very few regrets, I have to say.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yep.
You've never come across as people who have regretted anything you're doing. I think you sort of found the right place and found the way to do things that you wanted to do with your time.
I think so. And someone said it to me the other day. You someone said, "You've done it your own way." And I thought, well, have we? Yeah, I guess we have.
Mm-hmm.
We distributed our own products for the first 16 years. We did try a distributor for a year, the last year, just to see how that went. But to me, that was just obvious. And,
So ringing endorsement for distributors is what you're saying.
Oh, look, I don't think that was... It was a combination of things. I think it just reinforced to me how tough the market is, how tough the whole hospitality industry is at this stage. So that was an eye-opener. Look, I think if you find a good distributor, fine. But I think it was important in the early days for us to go and, when I was going and picking up empty kegs from venues, to actually meet the managers and people who were working behind the bar, because they were the people that were selling your beer. And I thought that was very important. A distributor, they're not going to love your product as much as you do, and I thought that was an important part of what we did. Became less important when the competition arrived.
But, and I guess and talking of loving what you do, it might be a nice one to sign off with. You're talking about selling through the last of your product. What will you be keeping at home that isn't going to be sold? What are the beers that there's going to be a few cases stashed away that?
Well, unfortunately, Catherine's going through the Stark Raven Stout pretty quickly. There will be some, unfortunately, the slow sellers. So the cherry sour, the barrel aged stuff.
The last bottle of Smoking Bagpipes went today.
I had the last bottle of Smoking Bagpipes before this interview. So here you go. And it was bloody delicious. Yeah.
The thing is, you can always still make all these beers.
I can on a homebrew basis. You're quite right. And that's the challenge before me. And I don't think I can, it's in my DNA. I can't not make stuff. So I think that's what I'll be doing out in the shed on a very small scale, just for our consumption.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Willie and Catherine. This has been great.
It's been a pleasure.
Welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Are you a supplier to the craft beer industry? Are you looking for more customers? Chat to the team at The Crafty Pint today. Across our website, email newsletters, and weekly podcast, we reach more industry decision makers than any other media platform. Whatever your objectives, we can help you create engaging advertising campaigns, podcast segments, or ad reads that cut through. Chat to Craig, that's me, today. Hit me up at craig@craftypint.com.
The Crafty Pint podcast is produced and edited by Matt Hoffman. You can get all your beer-related news and reviews on the Crafty Pint website, craftypint.com, and can stay up to date on future podcast episodes via our socials.
We wouldn't be able to produce the podcast or the website, events or festivals we run without the support of the beer industry, whether that's suppliers, bars, breweries or bottle shops. If you'd like to support the show or partner with the Crafty Pint in other ways, please reach out to Craig via the details in the show notes.
And if you're a beer lover who'd like to support what we do, you can join our exclusive club for beer lovers, the Crafty Cabal. Visit craftykabal.com for more.
And until next time, drink good beer.